Picture the landscape you call home, the rivers you walk beside, the valleys that cradle your towns, the gentle slopes that have always been there, or so it seems. But what if I told you that some of the most dramatic, valley-swallowing disappearances in Earth's history happened right under our feet, leaving almost no trace behind? Rivers are not just water in motion. They are living, evolving records of our planet's restless past, and sometimes entire valleys vanish, redirecting the flow of continents and rewriting the stories of civilizations. In this video, we're setting out on a journey to uncover 20 of these vanished valleys, places that were once deep, river-carved corridors teeming with life, only to be erased by forces almost beyond imagination. We'll travel from Ice Age floodscapes that vanished in days to ancient networks drowned by rising seas, from valleys lost beneath desert sands to others consumed by the slow grind of tectonic shifts. Each of these stories reveals how Earth's surface is not fixed but fluid, a dynamic canvas where nature's most powerful actions often go unseen until it's too late. By the time we're done, you won't look at a river the same way again. You'll sense the invisible histories flowing beneath every bend and waterfall, understanding that what seems permanent is only a moment in geological time. So come with me, let's trace the echoes of these lost worlds and discover how vanished valleys didn't just change the land, they changed everything. Think of a river not as a fixed line on a map, but as a living, breathing entity in a constant state of flux. Its course is a temporary arrangement, a snapshot in time of an endless tug of war between water and land. The valleys that cradle these rivers are not permanent either. They are sculpted, deepened, and sometimes completely erased by the immense geological forces at play beneath our feet. This relentless change is driven by a trio of powerful agents: the slow, grinding might of tectonic plates shifting the very foundation of continents, the dramatic influence of climate cycles that advance and retreat colossal ice sheets, and the persistent, patient work of erosion, where water and wind gradually wear down even the hardest rock over millions of years. One of the most fascinating processes in this dynamic system is something called river piracy or stream capture. This occurs when one river, through aggressive erosion or a sudden event like a landslide, literally steals the water from another river. The losing stream is left high and dry, its valley abandoned and destined to eventually fade from the landscape, while the pirate river grows more powerful, carving a new path and forever altering the drainage basin. This is why geologists often approach these landscapes like detectives at a crime scene. They follow the clues, anomalies in the rock layers, mysterious gaps in a mountain ridge, or a river that makes a sudden, sharp bend for no apparent reason, to reconstruct events that happened thousands or even millions of years ago. By reading this story written in stone and sediment, we don't just learn about the past, we gain crucial insights into how our planet might continue to change in the future, especially as human activity and a warming climate add new, powerful influences to this ancient equation. This foundational understanding of rivers as dynamic, ever-changing systems sets the stage for the incredible stories of loss and transformation we are about to explore. Now, to truly grasp the scale of what happened here, we need to journey back to the peak of the last ice age. Imagine a glacier of almost unimaginable size, a wall of ice over 2,000 feet high, acting as a natural dam in what is today northern Idaho. Behind this icy barrier, a vast body of water began to form glacial Lake Missoula. This was not a small mountain lake. It contained more water than Lakes Ontario and Erie combined, a towering, restless inland sea held in check only by that fragile plug of ice. But ice under immense pressure has a tendency to fail, and fail it did, not just once but repeatedly over centuries. The prevailing theory suggests that the ice dam would catastrophically rupture, unleashing a wall of water taller than the Empire State Building. This wasn't a flood, it was a geological superweapon. The water exploded across the landscape with a force greater than all the world's current rivers combined, traveling at speeds approaching 65 miles per hour. It hit the open plains of eastern Washington with the violence of a planetary impact. This colossal torrent did not simply flow over the existing landscape, it actively, violently erased it. Deep, soil-rich valleys that had taken millennia to form were scoured down to the bare bedrock in a matter of hours. The water clawed at the earth, plucking out house-sized boulders and carrying them along like pebbles in a stream, carving out massive potholes and leaving behind strange, isolated bare hills the locals call haystack butts. When the waters finally receded, they left behind a scarred, otherworldly landscape known as the Channeled Scablands, a vast, complex network of dry canyons, colossal ripple marks 40 feet high, and waterfalls that now stand completely dry. This event didn't just erase a few valleys, it completely rewired the entire drainage system of the Pacific Northwest, permanently altering the course and character of the mighty Columbia River. For the longest time, the scientific establishment refused to believe such a catastrophic event was possible. The prevailing doctrine was uniformitarianism, the idea that geological change happens slowly and gradually through the incremental forces we see every day. Then along came a geologist named J. Harlan Bretz. In the 1920s, he began mapping this bizarre terrain and proposed his outrageous theory that this desolate landscape was not the product of slow erosion, but of a colossal, short-lived flood of biblical proportions. His colleagues were deeply skeptical, some even hostile. They mocked his idea, calling it catastrophism, a step back into unscientific dark ages. For decades, Bretz defended his theory alone, meticulously gathering evidence. The turning point came with the advent of aerial photography. From the sky, the evidence was suddenly undeniable. You could clearly see the sprawling, interconnected channels, the giant ripple marks, and the sheer scale of the erosion features that could only be explained by a sudden, massive deluge. The very colleagues who had ridiculed him eventually awarded him geology's highest honor, the Penrose Medal, in a remarkable admission that he had been right all along. The story of the Scablands is a powerful lesson in keeping an open mind about Earth's history. It proves that our planet's story is not written only in the slow turning of pages, but also in sudden, violent paragraphs that can rewrite entire chapters of the geological record in a single, terrifying day. While the Missoula Floods show us the terrifying power of geological change happening in a flash, our next story takes us to the opposite end of the spectrum. Here, the Vanishing act wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, almost imperceptible transformation, a patient, relentless reshaping of the land that unfolded over thousands of years. We travel now to the picturesque English Lake District, a landscape of serene waters and rolling green fells that has inspired poets for centuries. But beneath this tranquil beauty lies a dramatic history of valleys lost and rivers redirected, not by a single violent event, but by the slow, persistent grind of Earth's natural cycles. During the peak of the last ice age, this entire region was buried under a massive ice sheet. Think of these glaciers not as static ice, but as colossal, slow-moving rivers of frozen water. They were the ultimate landscape artists, but ones that worked with tools of immense weight and abrasive power. As they inched forward, these glaciers scoured out the pre-existing river valleys, deepening and widening them into the classic U-shaped profiles we see today. They were carving the very stage upon which our story unfolds. But then the climate warmed and the ice began its long retreat. This is where the real mystery of disappearance begins. As the tremendous weight of the ice melted away, the land itself, which had been pressed down into the mantle for millennia, began to rise back up in a process known as post-glacial rebound. Imagine a memory foam mattress slowly expanding after a heavy weight is lifted. This rebound wasn't uniform. Some areas rose faster than others, subtly tilting the entire landscape. This gentle tilting had profound consequences for the water draining off the land. Pre-glacial valleys, which once had a clear downhill path to the sea, suddenly found their gradients altered. Some were left stranded, their outlets now higher than their heads, causing water to pool and form the beautiful lakes the district is famous for, like Windermere and Derwentwater. These lakes are essentially drowning the lower ends of those ancient, ice-carved valleys. Meanwhile, another silent force was at work: sedimentation. The melting glaciers didn't just leave behind water. They deposited immense amounts of rocky debris, boulders, gravel, sand, and fine clay, known as till. This material filled in the bottoms of many smaller valleys, effectively burying them and smoothing over the once rugged topography. In some places, these deposits created natural dams, blocking old drainage routes and forcing rivers like the Derwent and the Eden to find completely new paths to the sea. The river network we see today is therefore a palimpsest, a document where the original writing has been partially erased and written over. The current streams are often just the latest draft, flowing over valleys that have been filled, blocked, or tilted out of usefulness. The man who helped us begin to read this complex geological document was a pioneering 19th-century geologist named Adam Sedgwick. Born in the Lake District, he was one of the fathers of modern geology. Through meticulous fieldwork, he and his contemporaries started to piece together the puzzle. They found evidence of old river gravels high on valley sides, far from any modern watercourse, ghostly evidence of streams that once flowed at a different level. They mapped out the strange, erratic paths of some rivers, noting sharp bends and seemingly illogical routes that only made sense if you understood that the river was avoiding a buried valley or following a new path dictated by glacial debris. Sedgwick's work demonstrated that landscapes aren't forged by catastrophe alone. The Lake District stands as a powerful testament to the slow, patient, and ultimately transformative power of ice, water, and the very earth rebounding, working together over millennia to quietly erase entire valleys and redraw the map one grain of sand at a time. Now, let's journey from the gentle, glacier-sculpted fells of England to the raw, tectonic fury of the planet's greatest mountain range. The Himalayas are not merely mountains, they are a work in progress, a colossal crumple zone where the Indian subcontinent continues its slow-motion collision with Asia. This ongoing tectonic battle, raising peaks by centimeters each year, creates a landscape of incredible instability and power, where the very ground is restless and river valleys are among the most transient features on Earth. Here, the process of valley vanishing isn't a slow filling or a patient rebound, but a violent and sudden obliteration, often happening within a human lifetime. Primary architect of this destruction is the immense tectonic uplift. As the mountains are thrust skyward, the rivers that flow from them fight back, cutting down with tremendous force to maintain their course. This creates a precarious equilibrium where V-shaped river valleys are carved incredibly deep and steep. These gorges become the focal points for catastrophic failure. The combination of seismic activity from constant earthquakes and the undercutting action of the rivers themselves makes the valley walls incredibly prone to massive landslides. We're not talking about a few rocks tumbling down. We're talking about entire mountainsides, sometimes billions of tons of rock and earth shearing off and plunging into the gorge below. In an instant, a deep, ancient valley can be completely filled, creating a natural dam hundreds of feet high. The river that once flowed through that valley is now blocked, its original path buried under an unimaginable pile of debris. It has no choice but to find a new route, often spilling over the low point of the newly formed dam and beginning the process of carving a brand new valley elsewhere, while the old one vanishes beneath the rubble. A stunning example of this phenomenon involves one of the region's most important rivers, the Sutlej. Geological evidence suggests that in the distant past, the Sutlej River followed a very different course. It is believed to have flowed through valleys that are now completely lost, either buried under colossal landslide deposits or severed and beheaded by the aggressive, headward erosion of a competing river in an act of river piracy. The Sutlej was essentially captured, its waters stolen and redirected onto a new path that now defines its modern course. This historical shift wasn't just a minor geographical adjustment. The Sutlej is a major tributary of the Indus River, and its waters are a critical resource for millions of people in both India and Pakistan for agriculture, drinking water, and hydropower. The ancient rerouting of this river fundamentally altered the distribution of this vital resource across the plains of Punjab, influencing where ancient civilizations could flourish and ultimately shaping the human geography of the entire region for millennia to come. This incredible dynamism means the Himalayas are a living laboratory for geologists, but it also presents a constant, looming hazard for the millions of people who live in the shadow of these great mountains. The same processes that erase valleys and redirect rivers can, without warning, trigger devastating flash floods. When one of these massive landslide dams inevitably fails, and they almost always do, it releases a catastrophic wall of water and pulverized rock down the vulnerable river valleys below. These events, known as glacial lake outburst floods or GLOF when involving glacial meltwater, have occurred with terrifying frequency throughout history and are a direct and deadly consequence of the Himalayas' relentless geological metamorphosis. The vanished valleys of this region are therefore not just relics of a distant past. They are a stark and present reminder that in the Himalayas, the ground beneath your feet and the path of the river that sustains you are both subject to change in a single, earth-shattering moment. Now, let's shift our focus from the towering heights of the Himalayas to a landscape that exists only in memory and deep-sea core samples. A vast, fertile plain that once connected continents, now lying silent and drowned beneath the cold, grey waves of the North Sea. To understand this vanished world, we must wind the clock back 20,000 years to the peak of the last ice age. So much of the planet's water was locked up in colossal ice sheets that global sea levels were over 120 meters lower than they are today. What is now the North Sea was, back then, a sprawling, exposed expanse of land known to scientists as Doggerland. This was no barren wasteland. It was a low-lying, river-laced plain, rich with forests, marshes, and grasslands, teeming with mammoths, reindeer, and the early human hunters who tracked them. Draining this enormous territory was a river system of staggering proportions, now called the Channel River by geographers. This wasn't a single, simple stream, but a massive, complex network of confluences, a prehistoric Amazon of northwest Europe. Its mighty trunk stream flowed westward through what is now the English Channel, acting as the main drain pipe for most of the continent's major rivers. The ancestral Rhine, the Thames, the Meuse, and the Scheldt, all the rivers we know as separate entities today, were then merely tributaries of this single, colossal waterway. They converged in the lowlands of Doggerland, their combined waters carving a deep and wide valley across the continental shelf as they flowed out into the Atlantic Ocean. This was the Channel River Valley, a geographical feature of immense importance that simply doesn't appear on any modern map. The fate of this entire world was sealed not by earthquakes or landslides, but by a far more gradual yet equally powerful force: climate change. As the global climate warmed, the great ice sheets began to melt, and the oceans started their relentless rise. For the people and animals of Doggerland, it was a slow-motion catastrophe unfolding over generations. The rising seas first began to inundate the lowest-lying parts of the plain, turning forests into salt marshes and then into shallow lagoons. Coastlines retreated, and the Channel River's valley began to flood from its mouth, working its way inland. This process, called marine transgression, continued for millennia, swallowing more and more land. Then, around 6200 BC, a final, dramatic event is believed to have delivered the coup de grace. A massive submarine landslide off the coast of Norway, known as the Storegga Slide, triggered a devastating tsunami that swept across the remaining low-lying areas of Doggerland. Whether this was the final blow or simply an acceleration of an inevitable process, the result was the same. The entire plain and the great river valley that defined it was completely submerged, vanishing forever beneath the waves. The consequences of this drowning were profound and permanent for the river systems of Europe. The single, unified drainage basin was shattered. With Doggerland gone and the English Channel filled with water, the rivers that once fed the mighty Channel River were suddenly isolated from one another. They now emptied into a newly formed sea. The Rhine, for instance, was forced to find a new, much shorter path to the ocean, establishing its modern delta in the Netherlands. The River Thames, once a tributary flowing into a larger system, suddenly found itself as an independent river flowing into a newly formed estuary, its character and flow permanently altered. The drowning of this one great valley didn't just erase a land bridge between Britain and the continent. It fundamentally rewired the entire plumbing system of northwestern Europe, creating the separate, distinct river basins we recognize today, and forever changing the geographical and cultural destiny of the region. Leaving behind the drowned world of Doggerland, we now travel to a landscape defined not by an abundance of water, but by its profound and powerful scarcity. The American Southwest presents a stark paradox, a region of breathtaking canyons and vast deserts, all sculpted by a force that is often completely absent from the scene. Here, water doesn't flow gently. It arrives in sudden, violent outbursts that have the power to erase the past and carve the future in a single, furious event. The story of the Southwest is a masterclass in the patient, relentless power of erosion, where the very concept of a permanent valley is constantly being challenged and rewritten. The stage for this drama is the immense Colorado Plateau, a vast uplifted block of sedimentary rock that encompasses much of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. This is a layered landscape with its history written in bands of red sandstone, white limestone, and brown shale. The key to understanding the vanished valleys here lies in the region's unique hydrology. For much of the year, the land is parched, a sun-baked expanse of rock and dust. But when the rains do come, particularly during the summer monsoon season, they are often torrential. Dry creek beds, known as arroyos or washes, can transform in minutes into raging, chocolate-brown torrents. These flash floods are not like the gentle soaking of a temperate forest. They are abrasive slurries, thick with sand, gravel, and boulders, acting like liquid sandpaper against the bedrock. This is where the real work of vanishing happens. A single, catastrophic flash flood can accomplish what 1,000 years of a gentle stream could not, scouring out a brand new channel or completely obliterating an older, smaller valley in a night. This process of sudden, aggressive erosion leads directly to one of the most fascinating geological phenomena in the region, river piracy or stream capture. Because the landscape is so layered with resistant caprocks overlying softer strata, erosion doesn't happen evenly. One river system working headward might tap into a layer of soft shale and erode backwards at an incredible rate, like a saw cutting through soft wood. This river can literally steal the water from a neighboring stream that is flowing on a harder layer, beheading it and diverting its flow into its own channel. The valley that once held the captured stream is then abandoned. Its water source gone, it becomes a wind gap, a dry, silent notch in a ridge, a ghost of a river that once was. Over millennia, these silent, dry valleys are slowly filled with wind-blown sand and rockfalls, their original forms gradually fading from the landscape until all evidence of their existence is buried. No one understood this cycle of creation and destruction better than the legendary one-armed explorer and geologist, John Wesley Powell. His daring expeditions down the Colorado River in the late 1800s were among the first to systematically document this bizarre and beautiful land. As he navigated the terrifying rapids of the Grand Canyon, he wasn't just trying to survive, he was reading the story in the rocks. Powell was one of the first to grasp the concept of antecedent drainage, the idea that a river can maintain its course even as the land uplifts around it, cutting down through the rising rock in a spectacular display of persistence. He saw the countless side canyons, dry washes, and abandoned terraces as evidence of a dynamic, not a static, world. He realized that the Grand Canyon itself is the ultimate testament to river piracy and the abandonment of valleys on a colossal scale. The Colorado River didn't just slowly wear down a plateau. It captured other streams, beheaded rivals, and constantly changed its own network of tributaries, leaving a complex history of vanished valleys in its wake. The most iconic example of this power is, of course, the Grand Canyon itself, but it's not alone. Throughout the plateau, you can find evidence of this relentless competition. The Green River, a major tributary of the Colorado, shows clear signs of having captured streams that once flowed in completely different directions. In places like Canyonlands National Park, you can stand on a high mesa and look out over a labyrinth of canyons, some dry and silent, others holding a tiny trickle of water, and still others carrying the main flow of a powerful river. It is a landscape frozen in the middle of a slow-motion battle, where rivers are constantly stealing from each other and rewriting the map. These vanished valleys of the American Southwest serve as a powerful reminder that water, even in the smallest of amounts, is the most powerful landscape architect on the planet. It teaches us that absence can be just as telling as presence, and that a dry, silent canyon might hold the echo of a river that once roared. This journey into vanished valleys now takes us to a land where the very ground is still rising, slowly and inexorably, in a monumental act of geological recovery. Scandinavia presents a unique and ongoing drama, not of valleys being violently erased, but of them being gently, yet decisively, tilted out of existence. Here, the story is one of patient, powerful adjustment, a process so slow it's invisible to our eyes, but with consequences that have reshaped an entire subcontinent and redirected the flow of its rivers over thousands of years. To understand this, we must first grasp the concept of post-glacial rebound, or isostatic adjustment. Imagine the Earth's crust not as a rigid, unchanging shell, but as floating on a viscous, malleable mantle beneath. During the last ice age, Scandinavia was buried under a crushing weight of ice, in some places over 2 miles thick. This unimaginable mass pressed the land down into the mantle, much like pressing your thumb into a soft memory foam mattress. Then, beginning around 12,000 years ago, the climate warmed and the ice began to melt away. But the story didn't end there. As the immense weight was lifted, the depressed land began a slow, stubborn rise back to its original position. This is post-glacial rebound in action, and it's still happening today. In parts of Sweden and Finland, the land is rising at a rate of nearly a centimeter per year, a pace that might seem negligible, but over centuries it adds up to a dramatic reshaping of the landscape. This relentless uplift is the silent, invisible force behind the vanishing valleys of Scandinavia. In the immediate aftermath of the ice retreat, the land was dotted with countless lakes and wetlands held in the deep, U-shaped valleys scoured by the glaciers. These depressions were perfect natural basins for water, but as the land rebounded, it did so unevenly. The areas that were under the thickest ice, like central Sweden, are rising faster than the coastal margins. This creates a subtle but persistent tilting of the entire landscape. Imagine a giant, invisible hand slowly lifting one end of a vast, water-filled platter. What happens? The water begins to drain away. This is precisely what occurred across Scandinavia. Valleys that were once effective containers for lakes found their outlets being lifted higher than their heads. Water that was once content to sit in a placid lake suddenly had a new downhill gradient to follow. It began to drain away, seeking a new path to the sea. The lake slowly shrank, often draining completely, leaving behind flat, fertile plains of exposed lakebed. The valleys themselves, now dry and empty, began to fade. Their slopes were softened by erosion and vegetation, and they were gradually infilled with sediment, until the distinct glacier-carved troughs were smoothed over into gentle, almost imperceptible dips in the terrain. They vanished not with a cataclysm, but with a sigh. One of the most significant river systems affected by this process is Sweden's Göta älv. This river is a vital artery flowing from the Great Lake Vänern, the largest lake in the European Union, to the Kattegatt Sea at the city of Gothenburg. But the relationship between the lake and the river is a direct product of this ongoing rebound. As the land continues to rise, it is actively altering the gradient and the flow of the Göta älv. The river's course is being subtly steepened, which can increase its erosive power in some sections. Furthermore, the rebound is slowly but surely lifting the entire basin of Lake Vänern itself. While the lake is still immense, its dynamics and its outlet are in a state of constant, gentle flux, a direct consequence of the Earth's memory of its icy burden. The pioneering mind who first unraveled this slow-motion mystery was the Swedish geologist Gerard de Geer. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, de Geer developed a revolutionary method for studying this rebound by examining the delicate, rhythmic layers of sediment known as varves that were deposited in the glacial lakes. Each varve couplet, a light layer of sand from summer meltwater and a dark layer of silt from winter settling, represents a single year, much like a tree ring. By counting these varves across Scandinavia, de Geer and his colleagues could not only map the precise retreat of the ice sheet, but also quantify the rate of the land's rebound with astonishing accuracy. His work provided the first clear, scientific evidence that the ground beneath our feet is not static, and that the effects of the ice ages are still actively sculpting our world today. The transformed landscapes of Scandinavia, with their drained lake plains and redirected rivers, stand as a powerful testament to this enduring legacy, showing us that the planet's recovery from an ice age is a process that unfolds over millennia, quietly erasing old valleys and rewriting the hydraulic map of entire nations. From the patient, uplifting rebound of Scandinavia, we plunge into a world of a different kind of dynamism, a place where the very concept of a stable river seems almost laughable. The Amazon basin is Earth's greatest hydrological engine, a sprawling, living network that pumps unimaginable volumes of water across a continent. But to look at a map of its current, snaking rivers is to see only the latest draft of a story that has been endlessly revised. Beneath the emerald canopy of the world's largest rainforest lie the ghosts of countless vanished valleys, evidence of a river system in a constant, restless state of flux, rewriting its own course over millions of years. Primary forces driving this incredible transformation are the deep, grinding movements of tectonic plates and the persistent, sneaky process of river piracy. Unlike the sudden, catastrophic changes seen in the Himalayas or the Scablands, the Amazon's transformations often occur over such vast timescales and areas that they are almost imperceptible. The entire basin is a giant, shallow saucer, a foreland basin created by the ongoing uplift of the Andes Mountains to the west. As the Andes continue to rise, they act like a giant bulldozer, shoving the land to the east and creating subtle, large-scale tilts across the Amazon. This gentle tilting is enough to completely alter the gradient of a river the width of a continent. A river that once flowed sluggishly southeast might find its path blocked by a newly uplifted ridge, its gradient reversed, forcing it to turn and find a new route entirely, often to the Atlantic in the east. Meanwhile, in the flat, low-lying heart of the basin, a quieter but equally effective form of theft is always at work: river piracy on a monumental scale. Here, the land is so flat that a difference of just a few meters in elevation can decide the fate of an entire watershed. A river eroding headward through the soft, sandy sediments can tap into the channel of a neighboring river. Because water always follows the path of least resistance, it will abandon its old, slightly higher valley and defect to the new, steeper, and more efficient route. The valley left behind is then abandoned, its water source stolen. Without the scouring force of the current, it begins to slowly silt up, filling with sediment from seasonal floods and collapsing banks, until the original deep valley is completely buried and vanishes under a blanket of mud and vegetation, becoming just another part of the flat forest floor. A stunning example of this is the journey of the Purus River, one of the Amazon's major tributaries. Today, the Purus is known for its incredibly meandering path, one of the most sinuous rivers on the planet. But geological evidence suggests its history is far more complex than its modern loops suggest. Sediment cores and satellite-based topographic studies have revealed that the Purus, or its ancestral form, once occupied a much different and straighter valley. It's believed that tectonic shifts, possibly related to the growth of the Purus Arch, a subtle, buried ridge of ancient rock, gradually altered the landscape's tilt. This change in gradient allowed a more aggressive, neighboring river to pirate the Purus's water, forcing it onto a new, contorted path. The river's original, straighter valley was left to die, slowly infilling with sediment from the surrounding forest until all traces of it were buried and lost. This ancient, vanished valley now lies hidden beneath hundreds of feet of sediment and dense rainforest, a ghost channel directing nothing but the roots of trees. The mind-boggling scale of these changes is only now coming into focus thanks to modern technology. It is the view from space that has truly revolutionized our understanding. Satellite imagery and radar topography, like that from the NAS, a shuttle radar topography mission, allow scientists to see through the dense rainforest canopy and map the microtopography of the basin floor. What these eyes in the sky reveal is a landscape littered with paleo-channels, the faint, ghostly impressions of ancient, abandoned river valleys visible only as subtle curves in the terrain or differences in vegetation. The Amazon floodplain is not a blank slate. It is a complex palimpsest, a document written, erased, and rewritten by the river over and over again. These changes are far from just academic. they have directly shaped one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. When a river changes course, it doesn't just move water, it moves entire ecosystems. The creation of new floodplains, the isolation of old oxbow lakes, and the constant reshuffling of habitats create a mosaic of environments that drives speciation. Different fish populations can become isolated in new river branches, evolving into distinct species. The distribution of plant life is dictated by the ever-changing patterns of flooding and sediment deposition. The incredible biodiversity of the Amazon is, in many ways, a direct product of its geological instability. The lost valleys of the Amazon are a profound reminder that stability is an illusion, even for the planet's greatest river. Its current majesty is merely a snapshot in a multi-million-year-long film of transformation, where valleys are born, stolen, buried, and forgotten, all beneath the unchanging gaze of the green cathedral above. Our journey now takes us to a continent defined by its ancient, sun-baked heart and its profound relationship with water, or the lack thereof. Australia's outback presents a story of disappearance not born from violent cataclysms or tectonic upheaval, but from a much slower, more pervasive force, a deep and lasting climatic shift towards aridity. Here, the vanished valleys are not drowned or buried by rubble. They are ghosts of a greener, wetter past, slowly suffocated by sand and silence, leaving behind a transformed and often paradoxical landscape. To understand this, we must rewind the clock tens of thousands of years. During the last ice age, Australia was a dramatically different place. Colder global temperatures meant less evaporation, and despite the locked-up ice, many now arid regions received more reliable rainfall. The continent's interior was crisscrossed by powerful, permanent river systems flowing through deep, well-defined valleys, feeding vast freshwater lakes like the megalake that once existed in what is now Lake Eyre. This was a land of abundance where water was a constant and shaping presence. Then the world warmed. As the ice age waned, global climate patterns shifted. For Australia, this meant the intensification of a phenomenon that would come to define it: aridification. The rain belts moved, the interior dried out, and the great inland seas began to evaporate, leaving behind vast, salt-encrusted pans. This climatic transformation is the central villain in our story of vanishing valleys. Without consistent rainfall to sustain them, the mighty rivers of the interior began to fail. Their flows became intermittent, then rare, then ceased altogether. This is where the process of disappearance truly began. A river is not just a channel for water, it is also a conveyor belt for sediment. A healthy, flowing river carries sediment downstream and out to sea, keeping its valley clear. But when a river dies, that conveyor belt stops. The sediment it once carried, the sand, silt, and clay, now has nowhere to go. It begins to accumulate within the very valley it helped to carve, a process known as valley infilling. Over millennia, these once deep valleys were gradually choked with their own debris. Wind, the new dominant force in the arid landscape, piled sand dunes across their mouths and slopes, further blurring their outlines until the distinct topographic signature of the valley was completely smoothed over, vanished under a blanket of sand and sediment. This process did not happen uniformly, and it led to dramatic and lasting changes in the continent's drainage. The Murray-Darling Basin, Australia's most significant river system today, is a palimpsest of these ancient changes. This vast basin is the country's agricultural heartland, yet it is a system living on borrowed time, a mere remnant of its former self. Geomorphologists studying the basin have found evidence of a much more extensive and integrated river network in the distant past. They have mapped the ghosts of ancient valleys through subtle variations in soil composition, fossilized river gravels found on high ground far from any current watercourse, and the telltale signs of stream capture. As the climate dried, the competition for water became fierce. A river system with a steeper gradient or a more reliable water source, perhaps fed by snowmelt from the Australian Alps, could aggressively erode headward. It would eventually tap into and capture the flow of a weaker, dying river in the arid plains, beheading it and diverting its already dwindling water supply. The valley of the captured river, now completely abandoned, would then be left to silt up and fade away. The modern Darling River, with its famously intermittent and muddy flow, is likely a composite of these ancient capture events, its path a testament to the piracy that occurred as the land dried out. The implications of these vanished valleys extend far beyond academic curiosity. They are a cautionary tale written in the very soil of the continent. The loss of these ancient waterways fundamentally shaped the ecosystems of the outback, creating the ephemeral waterholes and dry riverbeds known as billabongs and creeks that are only briefly resurrected by rare flood events. This hydrological scarcity dictates the patterns of life for every creature, from the hardy gum trees to the human communities that have adapted to this rhythm over tens of thousands of years. For modern Australia, this deep history is a critical guide for managing its precious and limited water resources in the Murray-Darling Basin. The system is already under immense stress from agricultural extraction and the escalating pressures of climate change. Understanding that this basin is a fragile relic, a shadow of a once mightier network, underscores the profound vulnerability of this vital resource. The vanished valleys of the Australian outback stand as a stark monument to the power of climate to permanently rewrite a continent's destiny, reminding us that a change in rainfall patterns is not a temporary inconvenience but a force that can, over centuries, erase entire landscapes and redefine the relationship between a land and its water. Leaving behind the sun-scorched, slowly silting valleys of the Australian outback, we now journey to a region where the story of disappearance is written not in sand, but in salt water, a cataclysm of rising seas that didn't just erase a landscape, but may have drowned a world of human memory. The story of the Black Sea is one of the most compelling and controversial tales of a vanished valley, an event that stands at the dramatic intersection of geology and human prehistory, suggesting that some of our oldest flood myths might be rooted in a very real and terrifying geological truth. To set the stage, we must travel back in time to the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. The world was still emerging from the grip of the glaciers, and sea levels, though rising, were still far lower than they are today. At that time, the Black Sea was not a sea at all. It was a vast, landlocked freshwater lake, which geologists call Black Sea Lake. Its surface lay over 100 meters below the level of the global oceans. This isolated basin was fed by some of Europe and Asia's greatest rivers, the Danube, the Dnieper, the Don, and others which carved deep, fertile valleys across the exposed continental shelf as they flowed into this giant freshwater oasis. This surrounding land, a sweeping plain now dubbed the Pontic Shelf, was not a barren wastretch. It was likely a verdant, low-lying landscape, rich with game and resources, a potentially ideal haven for early Neolithic farmers and hunter-gatherers. The rivers flowing into this lake would have created lush, habitable valleys, teeming with life and possibly supporting some of the earliest agricultural communities in the region. The entire fate of this world hinged on a single, precarious geographical feature, a natural sill or barrier located where the Bosporus Strait is today. This land bridge was all that separated the shrinking, freshwater Black Sea lake from the rising, saltwater Mediterranean Sea. For centuries, this barrier held. But around 5600 BC, According to the bold hypothesis put forward by geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman from Columbia University, the pressure became too great. As the melting polar ice caps continued to pour water into the world's oceans, the Mediterranean steadily rose. Eventually, the water breached the Bosporus sill. What began as a trickle soon became a torrent, and then a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Ryan and Pittman calculate that the Mediterranean saltwater burst through with a force 200 times greater than that of Niagara Falls. This wasn't a slow rising tide. It was a cataclysmic deluge, a roaring wall of saltwater pouring into the freshwater basin below. The Black Sea Lake began to rise alarmingly fast, possibly inundating its surrounding shores at a rate of 15 centimeters per day. Within a matter of months, or at most a few years, over 150,000 square kilometers of land, an area larger than the state of Georgia, were swallowed by the invading sea. The deep, fertile river valleys carved by the Danube and other rivers were instantly drowned, their mouths submerged and transformed into underwater estuaries. The freshwater lake was violently converted into a saltwater sea, a process that killed its unique ecosystem and created the stratified, anoxic depths that define the Black Sea to this day. The implications of this event extend far beyond mere geology. Ryan and Pittman famously proposed that this catastrophic flooding of the Pontic Shelf and its river valleys was not forgotten by the people who lived through it. Those early farming communities would have been forced to flee their drowned homes in a desperate mass migration. As they scattered in all directions, carrying with them the story of the great flood that destroyed their world, they would have carried their agricultural knowledge into the hinterlands of Europe, Anatolia, and the Caucasus. This event, they argue, could be the deep, historical seed that grew into the great flood narratives found in so many ancient cultures, most notably the story of Noah's Ark in the Epic of Gilgamesh and later, the Hebrew Bible. While the Black Sea deluge hypothesis is not without its scientific critics, who debate the timing and abruptness of the event, more recent geological surveys and core samples have continued to find evidence supporting a major, rapid inundation. The vanished valleys of the Black Sea are therefore more than just a geological curiosity. They represent a potential lost chapter in the story of human civilization. They illustrate with stunning clarity how a single act of marine transgression, the ocean reclaiming the land, can in an instant obliterate entire landscapes, rewrite the endpoints of continental river systems, and perhaps even echo through thousands of years of human mythology, forever changing the course of history and culture. Now we ascend to the roof of the world, to a landscape so vast and high it seems to touch the sky, the Tibetan Plateau. This is not just another mountain range. It is a colossal, elevated stage where the planet's most powerful geological forces are engaged in a relentless performance, one that directly dictates the fate of nearly half of humanity. Here, the process of valley vanishing is not a singular event but a constant, slow-motion ballet of ice, rock, and water, where the very sources of Asia's greatest rivers are continually being reshaped, threatening the fragile balance upon which civilizations depend. The Tibetan Plateau earns its title as the Third Pole for a very good reason. It holds the largest reserve of freshwater outside the polar ice caps, locked away in thousands of glaciers that cling to the slopes of the world's highest mountains. These glaciers are the literal fountainhead for many of the continent's iconic rivers, but this frozen reservoir is also a powerful, erosive agent. During warmer periods, glacial meltwater carves deep, steep-sided valleys into the plateau's surface. However, the true architect of change here is the same immense tectonic force that created the plateau in the first place. The Indian tectonic plate continues its northward collision with Asia, pushing the entire plateau upward at a rate of several millimeters per year. This relentless uplift is a game of geological tug-of-war with the rivers below. As the land rises, the rivers cut down, striving to maintain their course in a process known as antecedent drainage. This struggle creates landscapes of breathtaking scale, like the Yarlung Tsangpo Gorge, one of the deepest and steepest canyons on Earth. But this intense competition also makes the region incredibly unstable. The deep V-shaped valleys become prone to massive landslides, often triggered by earthquakes, which can instantly dam a river and bury its valley under billions of tons of rock. Even without such catastrophes, the constant uplift can subtly alter the gradient of the land. A gentle, almost imperceptible tilt can be enough to divert a glacier's flow or cause a river to abandon its ancient valley and spill over a new drainage divide, carving a fresh path and leaving its old course to slowly fade into obsolescence. The consequences of these shifts are felt thousands of miles away, for the rivers born on this plateau are the lifelines of Asia. Consider the Yangtze River, the longest in Asia, and the Yellow River, the revered cradle of Chinese civilization. Both owe their existence to the intricate network of valleys and glacial streams high on the Tibetan Plateau. Geological studies, using techniques like satellite imagery and sediment analysis, have documented how the upper reaches of these rivers have been dramatically rerouted over millennia. The Yellow River, in particular, is believed to have undergone significant captures, where more aggressive tributaries have stolen its headwaters, forcing it onto a new path and altering its sediment load and flow volume. These changes in the river's infancy echo all the way to its delta, influencing flood patterns, agricultural productivity, and the very location of ancient settlements. When a valley vanishes on the plateau, it doesn't just change a local map, it sends a ripple through time and space that can alter the hydrological pulse of entire nations downstream. This immense dynamism underscores a profound and alarming fragility. The Tibetan Plateau is not a static, immutable water tower. It is a complex and exquisitely sensitive hydrological system. The processes of glacial melt and tectonic uplift are now being accelerated by human-induced climate change. Rising temperatures are causing the glaciers to retreat at an unprecedented rate, increasing the risk of glacial lake outburst floods that can scour out valleys in a matter of hours. Meanwhile, the same warming is thawing the alpine permafrost that acts as a glue, stabilizing the steep valley slopes. As this glue melts, the risk of catastrophic landslides that can block and redirect rivers increases exponentially. The vanished valleys of the past are a natural record of Earth's power, but the valleys that may vanish in the future signal a new era of instability. The water security for billions of people, from farmers in the North China plain to megacities like Shanghai and Chongqing, is intrinsically linked to the stability of this high-altitude landscape. The ongoing geological drama on the roof of the world is a stark reminder that the sources of our greatest rivers are not permanent fixtures, but are themselves subject to the relentless and changing forces of a dynamic planet. But to find a landscape transformed not by ice or quaking earth, but by the gentle, patient accumulation of life-giving soil, we must travel to the very cradle of civilization itself. The Nile River is an icon of permanence, a slender, green thread of life winding through the desert that has sustained human society for over 7,000 years. Yet, the seemingly immutable delta that fans out at its mouth, that fertile triangle that was the breadbasket of the pharaohs, is itself built upon a foundation of lost worlds. The story of the Nile Delta is not one of a stable, unchanging gift from the river, but a dramatic tale of valleys buried, channels abandoned, and a coastline constantly reshaped by the very silt that made Egypt powerful. Beneath the vast, flat farmlands of the modern delta lies a hidden, much more ancient topography. During the last ice age, when sea levels were over 100 meters lower, the Mediterranean coastline was many kilometers farther north. The Nile was not a delta at all, but a mighty river flowing through a deep, dramatic canyon, a Grand Canyon-scale valley carved into the continental shelf as it journeyed to the sea. This was the Paleo-Nile Valley, a deep and winding trench that would be completely unrecognizable to anyone standing on the delta's surface today. As the Ice Age ended, global seas began to rise and the Mediterranean advanced inland, flooding this great canyon and turning it into a long, narrow bay. For a time, the Nile essentially emptied into a marine estuary, but the river did not surrender its course easily. It fought back against the rising sea with its only weapon, sediment. Every year, the annual flood would bring millions of tons of rich, black silt from the Ethiopian highlands, dumping it into this newly drowned valley at its mouth. For millennia, this was a race between the rising ocean and the river's relentless delivery of mud. Eventually, the Nile won, filling the drowned valley to the brim, and then overflowing its banks to begin building the wide, flat, fan-shaped delta we know today. The original, deep valley of the Nile was thus completely buried, vanished under hundreds of meters of its own sediment, creating the incredibly fertile plain that would become the foundation of an empire. This process of burial and renewal did not stop in prehistory. The delta has always been a landscape in motion, and its many distributaries, the separate channels that branch off the main river like arteries, have been constantly shifting, silting up, and being abandoned over centuries. In ancient times, the Nile didn't flow through just the two channels of today, the Rosetta and Damietta branches. Historical records from Greek and Roman geographers like Herodotus and Strabo describe at least 7 major active distributaries, with countless smaller channels weaving a complex web across the delta. These distributaries were the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, determining which areas received the vital floodwaters and nutrient-rich silt. A city's fortune could rise or fall based on the whims of the river. A distributary channel might silt up and become blocked by sediment, causing it to be abandoned. Its valley would then slowly dry up and be reclaimed for agriculture, its identity as a waterway erased. Meanwhile, a flood might breach the riverbank elsewhere, scouring out a new channel and creating a new valley, bringing life to a previously arid area. This constant, slow-motion dance of channels vanishing and reappearing directly dictated the settlement patterns and agricultural prosperity of the entire region, forcing the ancient Egyptians to become master hydrologists to manage the unpredictable gift of their river. The man who has done more than any other to map these lost landscapes is geologist Jean Daniel Stanley of the Smithsonian Institution. For decades, Stanley and his team have used core drilling, extracting long cylinders of sediment from deep beneath the delta to read its hidden history like a book. By analyzing the layers of mud, sand, and fossil shells, they can pinpoint exactly where and when the ancient coastline was located and trace the paths of long-vanished river channels. Their work has revealed the ghostly network of these buried distributaries, showing how cities that were once major ports, like the ancient city of Heracleion, are now found kilometers inland because the river branch that served them silted up and vanished, and the coastline built outward from the accumulated sediment. This research has profound implications for understanding not just geology but human history. It shows how the failure of a single distributary and the disappearance of its valley could have led to the decline of a powerful trading city, while the emergence of a new channel could have fueled the rise of another. The fate of dynasties was in part written in the mud. This deep history makes the modern challenges facing the Nile Delta not just an environmental concern, but a civilizational one. The very processes that built the delta, the annual deposition of sediment that countered rising seas and replenished the land, have now been almost completely halted. The construction of the Aswan High Dam in the 1960s tamed the Nile's floods, a triumph of engineering that provided reliable water and electricity. But it also trapped the river's precious sediment behind it, starving the delta of the very material it needs to maintain its elevation. Now, with the sediment supply cut off, the delta is no longer growing. It is beginning to sink and compact under its own weight while global sea levels are rising. The valleys and channels that were buried over millennia are not rising to save it. They are a testament to a natural process that has been switched off. The slow, natural vanishing of valleys and the shifting of distributaries that ancient Egyptians adapted to over millennia has been replaced by a new, accelerated threat of submergence. The story of the Nile's vanished valleys reminds us that even the most enduring landscapes are dynamic, and that our attempts to control nature's variability can have unintended consequences that echo for centuries, challenging the very foundation of a culture built entirely on the gift of a river. Now we turn our attention to a process of disappearance that creates some of the most breathtaking scenery on our planet, a transformation so profound that the valley isn't just buried or filled, but is utterly drowned and reborn with an entirely new identity. This is the story of how deep, glacier-carved valleys on land are invaded by the sea, vanishing as terrestrial features to become the awe-inspiring fjords of Norway, Chile, New Zealand, and Alaska. This isn't a destruction but a metamorphosis where the original river valley is erased from the land and replaced by a majestic saltwater corridor. The creation of a fjord is a two-act geological drama, and it begins with the incredible power of ice. During an ice age, glaciers don't just sit idly on mountains. They are colossal, slow-moving rivers of ice that act like nature's most powerful bulldozers and sandpaper machines combined. As a glacier flows downhill from a highland accumulation zone, its immense weight and the rocks frozen within its base grind and scour the underlying bedrock with relentless force. They don't just follow existing river valleys, they actively seek out and exploit weaknesses in the rock, carving entirely new, profoundly deep, and characteristically U-shaped valleys. These glacial troughs are vastly different from the V-shaped valleys cut by rivers. They are wider, straighter, and have dramatically steep, near-vertical sides. Most importantly, they are excavated far below what would become sea level, creating a deep, navigable trough that reaches into the very heart of the mountainous coast. For a time, this deep valley remains a landlocked feature, often holding a river at its base or a ribbon lake, like Lake Lucerne in Switzerland or Lake Wakatipu in New Zealand, which are essentially freshwater fjords that the sea never reached. The second act of this drama is driven by a global change in climate. When the Ice Age ends and the great glaciers begin their rapid retreat, they leave behind these deep, empty, U-shaped trenches. The massive weight of the ice is also lifted from the continents, and the land, which had been pressed down into the mantle, begins to slowly rebound upward in a process called isostatic adjustment. But this rebound is often outpaced by another, even more powerful force, eustatic sea level rise. As the glaciers melt, they release enormous volumes of water back into the world's oceans. The sea level rises globally, and this rising ocean begins to advance inland, seeking out low-lying areas. It finds these deep, empty glacial troughs the paths of least resistance, and pours into them. The ocean floods the valleys, sometimes for dozens of miles inland. The moment the saltwater breaches the mouth of the valley, the original terrestrial valley officially vanishes. It ceases to be a river valley and is transformed into a fjord. The river that once flowed along its bottom now often becomes a waterfall, cascading from the cliff sides into the saltwater below, its outlet completely and permanently redirected. The impact on local freshwater systems is immediate and total. A river that once had a long, gentle journey to the sea now finds its lower reaches occupied by an arm of the ocean. Its estuary is dramatically shortened or, in many cases, eliminated entirely. The mixing of freshwater and saltwater happens right at the base of these towering cliffs, creating unique ecological niches. The fjord itself becomes a complex body of water, often with a layer of fresh, cold meltwater from the remaining glaciers flowing over the top of the denser, salty seawater below. This transformation doesn't just create beautiful scenery, it completely rewrites the hydrological map of the coastline, turning what was once a river drainage network into a fractured, flooded landscape of islands and deep marine inlets. The role of geographers and geologists has been crucial in piecing together this history. By mapping the underwater topography of fjords, they have found evidence of the original, submerged valley floors, often detecting the ancient river channels that are now hundreds of meters below the surface. They study the sediment layers on the fjord bottoms, which tell a story of transition from glacial till to freshwater river deposits, and finally to marine sediments, a clear record of the valley's drowning. They also measure the rates of post-glacial rebound, noting how some fjords in places like Scandinavia are becoming shallower over centuries as the land continues to rise, while others are deepening slightly due to ongoing glacial erosion at their heads. This ongoing study reveals that the formation of a fjord is not a one-time event, but part of a continuous cycle of glacial advance and retreat, sea level rise and fall. The lost valleys that became fjords are a powerful testament to the intimate and dynamic interplay between ice, ocean, and river, a reminder that the most stunning landscapes on Earth are often the result of a profound and complete geological disappearance. From the dramatic, ocean-flooded fjords of Norway, we now journey to a landscape whose very flatness tells a story of unimaginable power and total obliteration. The American Midwest, with its seemingly endless, gentle roll of farmland and prairie, presents a paradox. This is a place of profound geological tranquility, a stark contrast to the rugged mountains and deep canyons we've explored. Yet, this serene heartland is built upon a foundation of geological violence on a continental scale. The story of the Midwest is not one of valleys being carved, but of valleys being systematically and completely erased, their very existence scrubbed from the map by the slow, crushing advance of ice sheets over a mile thick. To understand the modern rivers that flow here, we must first comprehend the ancient valleys that are no longer there. Rewind the clock to the period before the Great Pleistocene Ice Ages, and the pre-glacial landscape of North America would be utterly unrecognizable. Geologists, through deep core samples and seismic imaging, have painstakingly pieced together a ghost map of this lost world. A major river system, which they call the Tease River, dominated the region. The Tease was no minor stream. It was a mighty river system, thought to be comparable in size to the modern Mississippi, and it flowed northward from the Appalachian Highlands, carving a deep and wide valley across what are now the states of West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. This ancient valley was the central artery of the continent's drainage, a topographical feature of immense significance, but its fate was sealed as the global climate cooled. From the north, the Laurentide ice sheet, a continent-spanning mass of ice thousands of feet thick, began its inexorable advance. This was not a smooth, gentle process. It was a crushing, grinding, and bulldozing force of nature. As the ice advanced, it did not simply flow over the existing landscape, it actively consumed it. The glacier acted like the world's largest earth mover, scouring the bedrock clean, plucking up entire hills, and filling in deep valleys with the pulverized rubble of everything in its path. The Great Tease Valley, along with countless other smaller tributary valleys, stood directly in the way of this icy juggernaut. The ice did not respect the river's course. It completely and utterly obliterated it, burying the deep valley under hundreds of feet of a mixed debris known as glacial till a chaotic jumble of clay, sand, gravel, and boulders that the ice had gathered and deposited in its wake. The Tease River was effectively beheaded and buried alive. With its ancient drainage system completely destroyed and buried, the landscape that emerged from under the retreating ice sheet was a blank slate, a vast, poorly drained plain of lumpy till and countless depressions. This new, flattened terrain presented a monumental problem for water drainage. The rain and meltwater had to find new paths to the sea, and it did so by establishing an entirely new river network on top of the glacial debris. This is the origin of some of North America's most iconic rivers. The Mississippi River, as we know it today, is largely a product of this glaciation. Its course was dictated by the margin of the ice sheet, funneling meltwater between the ice to the north and the older, unglaciated highlands to the south. The Ohio River, another titan of American hydrology, is essentially a massive spillway, a channel carved by catastrophic meltwater floods that poured out from the front of the retreating glacier, finding the lowest point between the glacial deposits and the Appalachian Plateau. These rivers are not ancient. In a geological sense, they are newcomers, teenagers compared to the ancient, destroyed Tease system. They flow over a buried world, their courses shaped not by underlying bedrock, but by the whims of glacial deposition. The implications of this geological reset are felt every day across the nation. The very flatness that made the Midwest challenging to drain also made it phenomenally fertile. The glacial till, ground into a fine, mineral-rich soil, became the basis for the agricultural empire that is America's breadbasket. The new river systems, particularly the Ohio and the Mississippi, became the essential transportation corridors for the expansion of the young United States, highways for steamboats and barges that carried settlers and goods into the continent's interior. The ancient, vanished Tease Valley, however, is not completely forgotten. Its ghost still haunts the landscape. In parts of Ohio and Indiana, modern rivers like the Scioto and the Ohio itself make sudden, puzzling 90-degree turns for no apparent reason. These anomalous bends are often explained as places where the modern river, flowing over the glacial debris, suddenly encountered the buried, solid wall of the pre-glacial Tease Valley. Unable to cut through it, the river was forced to turn and follow the valley's edge until it found a low point to cross. Even more strikingly, the buried valley continues to influence modern life as a vast, unseen aquifer. The old river channel, now filled with porous sand and gravel, holds an enormous reservoir of groundwater, a hidden legacy of the river that once was, now providing water for agriculture and industry across the region. The vanished valleys of the Midwest reveal that sometimes the most powerful geological story is not written in towering cliffs, but in the profound absence of them, a testament to how ice can not only create landscapes but can also, with finality, erase them. Now we plunge into the heart of Africa, into a world of deep, primordial green and flowing water on a scale that defies comprehension. The Congo River Basin is a universe unto itself, a vast, shallow bowl of rainforest where the air is thick with moisture and life. But to see the Congo River as a fixed feature is to misunderstand it completely. This is perhaps the most dynamic and complex river system on Earth, a place where the very ground is restless, and the paths of mighty rivers are constantly being stolen, abandoned, and rewritten in a silent, slow-motion war for water. The story here is one of valleys that didn't just fade away. They were actively captured and buried, their histories now hidden beneath the world's second-largest rainforest. Beneath the incredible biodiversity of the basin lies a restless geological foundation that is the true architect of this change. The entire region is shaped by a massive, slow upwarping of the continent known as the Congo Basin Swell. Think of it as a giant, very gentle dome pushing upwards across Central Africa. This tectonic force, driven by movements in the deep mantle, is constantly, imperceptibly tilting the land. This subtle tilting is enough to change the entire game for a river. A river that once flowed contentedly in one direction might suddenly find its gradient reversed or a competitor given a steeper, more efficient path to the sea. This sets the stage for the most dramatic process at work here, river piracy on a continental scale. In the wet, low-lying heart of the basin, erosion is incredibly aggressive. A river on one side of a drainage divide will furiously erode headward, cutting backwards into the soft sediments. Eventually, it can tap into the channel of a neighboring river that is flowing at a slightly higher elevation. Water, always seeking the path of least resistance, will immediately abandon its old, less efficient valley and defect to the new, steeper route. The valley that was just robbed is left completely abandoned. Its water source gone, it begins to silt up rapidly in the humid climate, filling with leaves, sediment, and fallen trees until the deep, water-scoured channel is completely buried under the advancing forest floor, vanishing without a trace. The evidence for this incredible history is written in the river's bizarre and contradictory modern course. The Congo River, alone among the world's great rivers, has a gigantic, perfect horseshoe bend in its middle section. It flows north, then makes a sharp turn to the west, then swings south before finally curving back to the west to empty into the Atlantic. This strange loop makes little sense for a river simply flowing downhill. To geologists, this is the unmistakable signature of a massive river capture event. The prevailing theory suggests that the upper part of the Congo, which flows north, was once a completely separate river system, perhaps even a tributary of the mighty Nile, flowing towards the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the lower Congo was a shorter, more powerful river flowing west to the Atlantic. The lower Congo, fueled by heavy rainfall and a steep gradient, began to erode headward at a ferocious rate. It eventually cut back so far that it breached the drainage divide and tapped into the channel of the north-flowing river. It literally stole the water, capturing the entire upper drainage basin and forcing it to make that dramatic U-turn to flow west. The original valley that continued the northward flow was beheaded and abandoned, left to silt up and vanish beneath the rainforest, a ghost of a connection to the Nile that once was. These silent, tectonic thefts have had profound and lasting consequences for the entire planet. The Congo River is a planetary artery, and its shifting course has directly shaped the evolution of the rainforest itself. When a river changes course, it doesn't just move water, it moves populations. It can isolate groups of animals on one side of a newly formed river, leading to speciation over millennia. The Congo River itself acts as a major biogeographic barrier, with different species of primates, birds, and plants found on opposite banks. Furthermore, the constant rerouting of nutrients and sediments by the river dictates the stunning fertility of the floodplain forests, creating a mosaic of habitats that supports an unparalleled level of biodiversity. For the human societies that have called this basin home for thousands of years, these vanished valleys have equally shaped destiny. The complex network of tributaries and the ever-shifting floodplains dictated migration routes, settlement patterns, and the development of trade networks. A village located on a thriving tributary might find itself stranded on a sluggish, silting backwater within a few generations as the river's energy was focused elsewhere, forcing communities to adapt constantly to the whims of their restless river. The lost valleys of the Congo are a powerful testament to the fact that even the most immense and powerful landscapes are not permanent, but are instead the temporary and ever-changing products of the deep, silent forces working far below the surface. Leaving behind the deep, tectonic drama of the Congo Basin, we now ascend to the spine of South America, to a realm where the very Earth is known to explode with world-altering force. The Andes Mountains present a story of valley vanishing that is both instant and terrifying, where the primary agent of change is not the slow grind of ice or the patient work of erosion, but the catastrophic, fiery fury of volcanic eruption. This is a landscape built on violence, where rivers can be beheaded, diverted, or completely entombed in a single, earth-shattering event, leaving behind a legacy of redirected waters and rewritten human histories. The Andes are the longest continental mountain range on Earth, a towering wall created by the relentless subduction of the Nazca Plate beneath the South American plate. This colossal tectonic pressure doesn't just create mountains, it fuels one of the most concentrated and active volcanic zones on the planet. This volatile geology sets the stage for a specific type of disaster, the volcanic landslide. The cones of these massive volcanoes are not built of solid rock, but are often unstable piles of ash, lava rock, and volcanic debris. During a major eruption, an entire flank of the mountain can collapse under the strain of earthquakes and the violent expulsion of material, triggering a catastrophic landslide known as a lahar or a debris avalanche. These are not simple flows of mud. They are fast-moving rivers of rock, ash, and superheated gas that can travel for dozens of miles at incredible speeds, filling entire valleys to depths of hundreds of feet in a matter of minutes. Any river valley in the path of such an event is not merely altered. It is utterly and completely obliterated, buried under a crushing blanket of volcanic material that solidifies into a new, unnatural plateau. The consequences for the river systems that originate in these highlands are immediate and profound. A valley that once channeled the headwaters of a major tributary to the Amazon is suddenly plugged. The river is blocked, its ancient course erased. This creates a natural dam behind which a new lake begins to form. The river, denied its path, has only two choices. It can either eventually overtop this new dam, catastrophically eroding it and causing a devastating downstream flood, or it can be forced to find a completely new route, spilling over the lowest point in the surrounding topography and beginning the slow process of carving a brand new valley from scratch. This instantly rewires the hydrological network, sending water to entirely new watersheds and starving old ones. The Amazon River itself, the mightiest on Earth by volume, is a collection of thousands of these tributaries. A single volcanic event in the Andes can therefore change the very character of the Amazon's headwaters, altering its sediment load and flow volume from the moment it is born. Perhaps no event illustrates this terrifying power more clearly than the 1,600 eruption of Huaynaputina in southern Peru. This was not merely a large eruption. It was one of the most violent volcanic events in recorded history in South America. The explosion was so colossal it sent ash circling the globe, causing a volcanic winter that led to famines as far away as Russia. But the local effects were even more direct and devastating. The eruption triggered massive pyroclastic flows and lahars that swept down the mountainsides with unimaginable force. These torrents of superheated debris poured into the surrounding river valleys, including the Rio Tambo Valley, filling them to the brim and beyond. Entire valleys were smothered, their topography erased under a deep, hardening layer of volcanic rock and ash. The local hydrology was completely scrambled. Rivers were dammed, creating new lakes that later burst with deadly consequences. Others were diverted onto new courses, their old channels lost forever. The agricultural lands in the region, which relied on the predictable flow of these rivers, were buried or rendered useless for generations, devastating the indigenous communities and Spanish colonial settlements alike. The eruption of Huaynaputina did not just change the weather for a year, it physically reshaped the land and the flow of water, creating a new hydrological reality that the people and ecosystems of the region had to adapt to for centuries. These catastrophic events are not confined to the history books. They represent a clear and present danger to the millions of people who live in the shadow of these fiery mountains. The same geological forces that built the Andes continue to threaten them. Modern monitoring has identified numerous volcanic lakes throughout the range that are dammed by unstable volcanic debris from ancient eruptions. The fear is that a new earthquake or eruption could trigger a collapse of these natural dams, unleashing colossal outburst floods that would roar down the valleys, wiping out everything in their path. The vanished valleys of the Andes are therefore a sobering reminder of the dual nature of these magnificent mountains. They are the source of life-giving water for the continent, the birthplace of its greatest rivers, but they are also a source of instantaneous, apocalyptic change. They teach us that a river's path is not just shaped by the gentle persistence of water, but can be erased in a single, violent breath from the earth itself. But to witness a disappearance that rewrote the map of human migration and drowned an entire continent in slow motion, we must now sail to the shallow, warm waters of Southeast Asia. Here, the story of Vanishing is not one of isolated valleys, but of a lost world, a vast, fertile subcontinent that once connected islands and mainland, only to be utterly erased by the rising ocean. This is the saga of the Sunda Shelf, a place where the drowning of countless river valleys didn't just change geography. It forever altered the course of human history and the evolution of life on Earth. To truly grasp the scale of this loss, we need to lower the world's oceans. During the peak of the last ice age, with so much water locked away in polar ice caps, sea levels plummeted by over 120 meters. This drop revealed an astonishing geographical feature, the Sunda Shelf. This wasn't just a bit of extra coastline. It was a sprawling, low-lying landmass larger than India that connected the modern-day islands of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo to the Malay Peninsula and mainland Southeast Asia. What is now the Java Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, and the southern South China Sea was, for tens of thousands of years, a vast, exposed plain. This wasn't a barren wasteland. Paleogeographers, using core samples and seismic mapping of the seafloor, have determined it was a mosaic of environments. It featured extensive river systems, lush rainforests, sprawling savannas, and even large freshwater lakes. This lost continent, often called Sunderland, was a thriving, habitable world. The great rivers of mainland Southeast Asia, which today seem to have their own separate identities, were once united in this landscape. The Mekong, the Chao Phraya, the Irrawaddy, and the Malay Peninsula's rivers were not independent entities. They flowed across the exposed continental shelf, converging into a few truly massive river systems that carved deep, wide valleys as they wound their way south and east towards the lowered sea level, which was hundreds of kilometers farther out than it is today. These were the arteries of Sunderland, and their valleys were the fertile heartlands that supported an incredible abundance of life. from giant elephants and rhinos to tigers, and the early human populations who hunted them. The end of this world was not sudden, but it was inexorable. As the global climate warmed, the great ice sheets began to melt, and the oceans began their relentless rise. For the people and animals living on the Sunda Shelf, this was a slow-motion invasion. The sea didn't rush in, it crept. Coastlines retreated by kilometers per generation. The ocean first flooded the lowest-lying river valleys, turning them into long, narrow estuaries. Then it advanced across the flat plains, isolating forested areas into islands before submerging them completely. The great river valleys that had defined the interior were drowned from their mouths inward, their lower reaches becoming submarine canyons. Over a period of several thousand years, the entire Sunda Shelf was systematically flooded. The land bridges to the islands were severed, first isolating Borneo, then Sumatra, and finally Java, transforming them into the islands we recognize today. The great river systems were abruptly truncated. The Mekong, for instance, saw its mouth jump hundreds of kilometers northwards almost overnight in geological terms, as its long southern valley on the shelf was drowned. Its entire lower course and delta had to be reconfigured, a process that is still ongoing today. The work of paleogeographers has been crucial in resurrecting this drowned world from the depths. By using sonar to map the seafloor, they have revealed the ghostly outlines of these sunken river valleys, their channels still perfectly preserved under the waves. Core samples extracted from the seabed contain pollen from ancient rainforest trees and the bones of long-extinct land animals, providing undeniable proof that this was once a terrestrial paradise. This lost landscape solves numerous scientific puzzles. It explains the remarkable distribution of animal species across Southeast Asia, showing how tigers, elephants, and rhinos could have walked from mainland Asia to Java, only to be stranded there when the seas rose. But its most profound impact was on our own species. The peopling of Australia and New Guinea, which occurred at least 65,000 years ago, would have been impossible without the Sunda Shelf. Early humans could have walked most of the way from mainland Asia, only needing to make short sea crossings to reach the visible shores of Sahul, the combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea. The submerged valleys of the Sunda Shelf were not barriers, they were highways for human migration. The drowning of this continent around 11,000 years ago likely forced populations to retreat, concentrate, and develop new maritime technologies, potentially fueling the development of the sophisticated seafaring cultures that would later colonize the remote islands of the Pacific. The vanished valleys of the Sunda Shelf are therefore a powerful testament to how a change in sea level can do more than just reshape a coastline. It can drown entire civilizations, strand entire ecosystems on newly created islands, and redirect the very flow of human history. Far to the north, in a landscape that seems forged of eternal ice, a much quieter and more insidious form of disappearance is now underway, one that threatens to unravel the very fabric of the land itself. The Siberian tundra has long been defined by its permanence, a vast frozen plain where the ground has been locked in a deep freeze for thousands of years. But this stability is an illusion, and the foundation of this world is now melting away, causing entire valleys to literally collapse and vanish from the map in a process that is as dramatic as it is alarming. The architect of this change is a layer of ground ice, and the phenomenon is known as thermokarst. To understand it, you must first picture the composition of the Arctic soil. It isn't just dirt and rock. It's a complex matrix of soil, organic matter, and massive, pure wedges of ice that can be dozens of meters deep. This permafrost is the glue that holds the entire landscape together, providing a solid, stable foundation for the rivers that flow over it and the valleys that contain them. However, when temperatures rise and this permafrost begins to thaw, that structural integrity vanishes. The ice wedges melt and the soil above, suddenly deprived of its support, collapses inward. This isn't a gentle sinking. It's a rapid, chaotic process that creates a bizarre and pockmarked terrain of sinkholes, landslides, and oozing mud. A river valley that has existed for millennia can have its entire side slump away in a matter of days, completely altering its course. In other cases, the thaw can create what scientists call a megaslump, where a gigantic section of a valley wall gives way, dumping an immense amount of sediment into the river below. This can instantly dam the flow, creating a new lake where a valley once was, or it can force the river to burst its banks and carve an entirely new path through the destabilized ground, abandoning its old valley to a chaotic mess of mud and meltwater. The scale at which this is affecting Siberia's great river systems is staggering. Consider the Lena River, one of the largest rivers in the world by volume and a titan of the Arctic. Its massive delta is a crucial nursery for Arctic life and a major carbon sink, but the land it flows through is becoming increasingly unstable. Satellite imagery has documented a dramatic increase in thermokarst activity across its basin. The same is true for the Yenisei River, another Arctic giant. These aren't small, isolated changes. As the valleys that guide these rivers destabilize and collapse, the rivers themselves are becoming less predictable. They are changing course more frequently, becoming muddier as they erode the collapsing banks, and releasing vast quantities of stored organic carbon and methane that had been frozen in the permafrost for millennia. This isn't just a geographical change, it's a biochemical transformation that is sending ripples through the entire global climate system. What makes the situation in Siberia so critical is its terrifying acceleration. While thermokarst is a natural process that has occurred in past warm periods, the current rate of warming in the Arctic is unprecedented. The region is heating up at more than twice the global average, acting as a bellwether for the planet. This rapid warming is acting like a blowtorch on the permafrost, triggering thaw processes that scientists are struggling to keep up with. The vanished valleys of the Siberian tundra are therefore much more than a geological curiosity. They are one of the clearest and most visceral warning signs of a climate system tipping into a new, unstable state. They demonstrate that global warming is not an abstract concept of rising temperatures, but a physical force that is actively and violently reshaping the planet's topography, with consequences that will echo through the world's river systems and climate for centuries to come. Now we journey from the frozen, collapsing tundra to a landscape where the very ground seems to dissolve, where valleys don't collapse from melting ice, but simply melt away themselves, vanishing from the surface as if they were never there. This is the mysterious world of karst, a terrain defined not by what is built up, but by what is eaten away. In the sun-drenched limestone regions surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, from the dramatic coast of Croatia to the rugged highlands of Greece, a silent, chemical war between water and rock has been waging for millions of years, resulting in some of the most bizarre and beautiful topography on Earth, and the complete disappearance of entire river valleys from the world above. Primary actor in this drama is a seemingly innocuous substance, rainwater, but as it falls through the atmosphere, it absorbs carbon dioxide, becoming a weak carbonic acid. When this slightly acidic water percolates down through the soil and encounters bedrock made of limestone or dolomite, a slow-motion chemical reaction begins. The acid in the water slowly dissolves the calcium carbonate that holds the rock together, molecule by molecule. This process, called chemical weathering, is incredibly slow, but over geological time, its effects are transformative and total. Unlike physical erosion, which scrapes and scours the surface, this dissolution works from within, creating a hidden, Swiss cheese-like network of weaknesses in the rock. Tiny fractures are widened into joints, which become solution tubes, which eventually expand into vast caverns and subterranean river systems. The land above, suddenly undercut and unsupported, becomes prone to sudden and catastrophic collapse. A valley that has existed for millennia can literally drop out of sight overnight, swallowed by the earth in a process known as subsidence. This relentless dissolution creates a whole vocabulary of unique and often surreal landforms that are the hallmarks of a vanishing landscape. The most dramatic are sinkholes or dollines, which form when the roof of an underground cavern can no longer support its own weight and collapses inward, creating a steep-sided depression that can be hundreds of meters across. When multiple sinkholes coalesce, they can form massive, flat-floored depressions surrounded by steep walls known as pulges. These pulges are often the most visible ghosts of vanished valleys. What was once a traditional, river-carved valley has been so thoroughly dissolved from below that its floor has collapsed and sunk, leaving behind a vast, open plain that can flood seasonally to become a temporary lake. Meanwhile, the rivers that once flowed on the surface are captured by the ever-expanding underground drainage network. They disappear into gaping holes in the ground called swallow holes or ponnas, abandoning their surface valleys entirely to flow in darkness through magnificent subterranean channels, only to re-emerge miles away at large springs, often at a much lower elevation. The original surface valley is left high and dry, a barren, rocky ghost of its former self, its water source having literally gone underground. The scientists who specialize in unraveling the mysteries of these elusive landscapes are hydrogeologists, and their work is akin to detective work in a world of false leads and hidden clues. Mapping the flow of water in a karst region is extraordinarily difficult because the hydrology is almost entirely subsurface and non-linear. To trace the path of a vanished river, they often use dye tracing, injecting fluorescent dyes into swallow holes and then monitoring distant springs for weeks to see where and when the color reappears. These tests have revealed incredibly long and complex underground river courses, proving that water flowing into a hole in one valley might travel for dozens of miles through labyrinthine caves before emerging in a spring in a completely different watershed. This work is crucial, for in the arid Mediterranean, these hidden aquifers are often the only reliable source of fresh water. The same process that makes the surface landscape so barren and dry also creates the most productive and vital water reservoirs below. The transformed rivers of the karst demonstrate a power far more subtle than the brute force of glaciers or the explosive violence of volcanoes, but it is no less effective. It is the power of chemistry and patience, of destruction through solubility. Water, by seeping into the most intimate fractures of the rock, doesn't just flow over the land, it consumes it from the inside out. The lost valleys of the Mediterranean karst are a stunning reminder that the most profound changes to our planet are not always written in towering mountains or deep canyons, but can also be found in the negative space, in the empty, sinking plains and the deep, dark holes where a river used to be. Now we travel to a vast, ancient tableland in the heart of India, a landscape forged in fire and shaped by patience, the Deccan Plateau. This is a world of dramatic contrasts, where some of the most violent geological events in Earth's history are followed by the slow, inexorable work of erosion, a combination that has systematically erased entire river valleys and redirected the lifelines of the subcontinent. The story here is not of a single cataclysm, but of a double-edged sword, the initial apocalyptic creation of the land itself, followed by a relentless million-year-long process of dissection and disappearance that continues to this day. The stage was set by one of the most profound volcanic events in our planet's history. Around 66 million years ago, a series of colossal eruptions, possibly triggered by the meteorite impact that spelled doom for the dinosaurs, began to vomit forth unimaginable quantities of lava across what is now western and central India. This was not the dramatic, cone-building volcanism of the Andes, but something far more overwhelming, a series of fissure eruptions that flooded the landscape in a deep, relentless tide of basalt. Layer upon layer of molten rock poured out, eventually accumulating to a depth of over 2,000 meters in some places, burying everything that existed before under a stark, new volcanic plain. This event, known as the Deccan Traps eruptions, effectively created a brand new geological canvas, a flat, featureless plateau of incredibly hard basalt rock that stretched for hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. Every valley, every hill, every river that had existed on the pre-volcanic landscape was instantly and completely entombed, vanished under a kilometers-thick tomb of black rock. The rivers we see today, like the mighty Godavari and Krishna, had to start completely from scratch, beginning the long, slow process of carving new valleys into this freshly laid foundation. This is where the second act of the story begins, the slow, patient work of disappearance. While the basalt is extremely hard, it is not impervious. It cools with a characteristic pattern of vertical fractures and horizontal joints, creating a natural grid of weaknesses. Into these cracks, the relentless forces of the Indian monsoon went to work. The heavy seasonal rains, combined with extreme heat and cooling, began to break down the rock through a process called weathering. The initially flat plateau gradually began to develop a drainage pattern, with water finding the lines of least resistance along these fractures. Over millions of years, what began as tiny gullies expanded into ravines, which deepened into gorges, and eventually matured into the massive, wide valleys that hold the great rivers today. But this process of valley creation is also, paradoxically, a process of valley destruction. As the rivers cut down, they expose older layers of the basalt flows. The headward erosion of tributaries constantly eats away at the plateau's edges, causing them to retreat. Valleys that were once narrow and deep are widened and transformed, their original forms erased by landslips and the collapse of their valley walls. The original, pristine valleys carved in the early stages of the river's history have been completely obliterated by this ongoing dissection, their memory preserved only in the broad, open shape of the modern river courses and the stepped, terraced appearance of the plateau slopes, which reveal the different layers of those ancient lava flows. The evidence for this dramatic reshaping is etched into the landscape itself, and has been meticulously documented by generations of Indian geologists. The most striking features are the great escarpments like the Western Ghats, which form a dramatic, cliff-like edge to the plateau. These are not traditional mountain ranges built by uplift, but the dramatic, eroded scarps of the plateau itself, representing the colossal amount of material that has been washed away into the Arabian Sea by the westward flowing rivers. Geological surveys and satellite imagery reveal the intricate and often anomalous drainage patterns of rivers like the Godavari. Its course shows signs of stream captures and diversions, where more aggressive tributaries have stolen water from others, leaving behind beheaded and abandoned valleys that now sit high and dry, their former purpose forgotten. The sedimentary records in the vast deltas of these rivers, particularly the Krishna-Godavari delta off the eastern coast, contain the mineralogical fingerprints of the Deccan basalts, providing a direct link between the violent volcanic origin of the plateau and the slow, steady erosion that continues to dismantle it. These geological transformations are far from just academic. they have directly and profoundly influenced the course of human civilization on the subcontinent for thousands of years. The Deccan Plateau, with its deep, fertile black soil derived from weathered basalt, became one of India's most important agricultural regions. The shifting courses of the Godavari and Krishna rivers and the disappearance of their older valleys dictated the location of the most fertile land. The need to manage the water from these seasonal rivers, which rage during the monsoon but can shrink to a trickle in the dry season, led to some of the earliest and most sophisticated water management systems in the world. Ancient kingdoms like the Satavahanas built intricate networks of tanks and canals to harness this variable flow, and their settlement patterns closely followed the reliable water sources provided by the major rivers. The cultural significance of these rivers is immense. The Godavari is revered as the Dakshin Ganga, the Ganges of the south, and its banks are dotted with pilgrimage sites. The vanished valleys of the Deccan Plateau therefore teach us a powerful lesson about geological resilience. They show how a landscape born from unimaginable violence can be tamed and transformed by the persistent, gentle forces of water and time into a fertile haven that has sustained millions and shaped the cultural and economic destiny of a nation. But perhaps the most profound vanishing act is no longer the work of glaciers or tectonic shifts, but our own. In a staggering departure from the deep time processes we've explored, humanity has now become a geological force in its own right, capable of erasing valleys and rerouting rivers not over millennia, but within a single generation. We have entered an age of human-made vanished valleys, where the deliberate reshaping of the landscape for water, power, and resources carries consequences that will echo for centuries. This final chapter in our story is not written in ancient rock, but in modern concrete and steel, and it forces us to confront a new kind of responsibility for the planet's hydrological future. The most iconic and widespread method of intentional valley vanishing is the construction of massive dams. The logic is compelling. Find a deep, narrow valley with solid rock walls, build a colossal concrete barrier across its mouth, and allow the river to fill the entire basin behind it, creating a vast reservoir. In that single act, the valley ceases to exist. It is drowned, its topography erased beneath hundreds of feet of water, its ecological function as a river corridor replaced by the still, artificial lake of a human-made reservoir. Nowhere is this more evident than in the American Southwest, where the Colorado River, once a wild, sediment-choked torrent that carved the Grand Canyon, has been tamed by a stairway of concrete. The most famous of these is the Hoover Dam, which plugged the deep Black Canyon, creating Lake Mead and submerging miles of the Colorado's former path. But the Glen Canyon Dam was perhaps even more transformative. Its construction in the 1960s flooded the stunningly beautiful Glen Canyon, a labyrinth of side canyons, arches, and waterfalls that many considered the equal of the Grand Canyon itself. Explorer and author Edward Abbey famously mourned this loss, calling it the place no one knew. With the closing of the floodgates, a unique and ancient valley, along with countless archaeological sites, was vanished forever beneath the placid, blue waters of Lake Powell. The river downstream was fundamentally altered, its seasonal floods eliminated, its temperature changed, and its life-giving sediment now trapped behind the dam, starving the ecosystems of the Grand Canyon and causing its beaches to erode away. Beyond dams, other forms of industrial extraction achieved the same result through sheer physical removal. Surface mining, particularly mountaintop removal mining for coal in the Appalachian Mountains of the eastern United States, doesn't just alter a valley, it systematically dismantles it. The process is as brutal as it sounds. To access thin seams of coal, entire mountaintops are blasted apart with explosives, and the resulting rubble, millions of tons of rock and soil, is simply pushed into the adjacent valleys below. These narrow, forested valleys, often cradling small, pristine streams, are not just filled, they are buried under hundreds of feet of loose spoil. The streams are entombed, their water forced to seep through toxic rubble, and the entire hydrological function of the watershed is shattered. The number of valleys vanished by this practice is staggering, with an estimated 2,000 miles of Appalachian headwater streams buried by valley fill since the 1970s. The social and ecological cost is immeasurable, destroying not only the landscape but also the communities and cultures that have depended on these valleys for generations. The motivation behind these modern vanishings is almost always framed in terms of human need: water security for growing cities, hydroelectric power for industries, and resources for economic development. The Aswan High Dam on the Nile, for instance, was built to control devastating floods and provide electricity, but it also trapped the fertile silt that once replenished the Nile Delta, which is now sinking and shrinking as a result. The Three Gorges Dam in China, the largest power station on Earth, required the flooding of the spectacular Qutang, Wu, and Xiling gorges and the displacement of over 1 million people. These projects represent a fundamental trade-off, a conscious decision to sacrifice a natural valley and its existing ecosystems for a perceived, centralized human benefit. The scale and speed of this transformation are unprecedented in Earth's history. While nature takes thousands of years to erase a valley through piracy or uplift, we can accomplish it in a decade. This acceleration forces upon us a set of profound ethical and practical questions that our ancestors never had to consider. What is the true cost of a vanished valley? Can we, as a species, be wise stewards of processes that we have only recently begun to understand? The legacy of these human-made vanished valleys will long outlast the civilizations that built them, leaving behind not just drowned canyons and buried streams, but a permanent mark on the geological record and a lasting question about our role in the ongoing story of Earth's ever-changing rivers. From the cataclysmic floods that scoured the Scablands in a matter of days to the slow, inexorable submergence of Doggerland's river valleys beneath the rising North Sea, the stories of these 20 vanished valleys paint a breathtaking portrait of a planet in a constant state of flux. We have journeyed across continents and through deep time, witnessing how the forces of ice, water, rock, and even our own species can completely rewrite the hydrological map of the world. Each of these disappearances, whether instantaneous or unfolding over millennia, has acted as a continental-scale pivot point, redirecting the flow of water, reshaping entire ecosystems, and irrevocably altering the course of human history. The valleys themselves may be gone, but their legacy flows on in the rivers we know today, reminding us that the landscapes we often perceive as permanent are, in the grand geological narrative, nothing more than temporary arrangements. This profound understanding forces us to look forward with a new perspective. The same processes that erased these valleys are still at work all around us. Climate change driven by human activity is now acting as a powerful accelerant, thawing permafrost in Siberia to collapse valleys, raising sea levels to drown coastal plains, and intensifying the very storms and floods that can trigger catastrophic erosion and river piracy. Meanwhile, our own engineering projects continue to vanish valleys at an unprecedented rate, trading natural corridors for reservoirs and buried streams for mined resources. The question is no longer if valleys will continue to vanish, but which ones will disappear next, and what the consequences will be for the intricate web of life and human society that depends on them. This is not a cause for despair, but rather a call to mindful observation and profound respect. The next time you stand on the bank of a river, whether it's a mighty continental artery or a gentle neighborhood stream, take a moment to truly see it. Look at the way it carves its banks, the path it has chosen through the landscape. Understand that you are witnessing a single frame in a long, dynamic movie whose past scenes featured lost worlds and whose future chapters are being written now in part by us. That river is a survivor, a testament to resilience and change. It holds the echoes of valleys that were and the seeds of valleys yet to be formed. We hope this journey through Earth's lost landscapes has changed the way you see the world beneath your feet. The story of our planet is endlessly fascinating, and we've only just scratched the surface. Let us know in the comments which vanished valley you found most astonishing, or if you have a mysterious landscape in your own part of the world that hints at a forgotten history. If you enjoyed this exploration, please subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the planet's greatest mysteries. Thank you for watching, and remember, the ground may seem solid, but the Earth is always moving.